Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this Tuesday's PhD support group meeting. I am Leni Liebenberg, and I am very, very happy to be hosting you today because we have a very, very extra special treat planned today. I feel like we need to have some pom-poms and host a big cheer and have some applause and make some noise to celebrate that Lewin Moodley is back with us today for the very first time this year. For those of you who were around last year, we had the privilege of learning from Lewin Moodley about various issues relevant to enhancing professional performance, things like accountability and adopting a growth mindset and effective communication. And today she'll be discussing another of her sessions with us today, emotional intelligence. The point of Lewin being around again this year is to provide refreshers on the courses that she has already done to reinforce those good habits. You know, you see a session, it resonates with you, you spend a couple of weeks or a couple of months, you know, really following those good habits, and then it all just falls apart, and then you need another refresher to just reinvigorate you. And that is why Lewin is here today to speak to us about the importance of emotional intelligence and how to harness this to enhance your performance and your productivity. So just a little bit about Lewin. Lewin is a qualified business coach, a program designer, a registered skills development facilitator. She has over 10 years of experience in the financial services and the insurance sectors, and she's very well equipped to discuss with us today the importance of emotional intelligence in enhancing our productivity and performance. So please welcome Lewin Moodley to the stage. We like interaction here. Lewin loves interaction as well. So please use your reaction icons, pop questions or comments in the chat. If you can, please switch off your videos just to minimize the impact on the bandwidth and to keep your audio muted. And let's have some fun with Lewin Moodley. Lewin, are you? Yeah. Take it away.
Yes, I am. I'm ready. Thank you so much for that warm welcome. I'm very excited to be here. I really got excited when I thought that we could leave the videos on, but I see it's still the rule where it needs to to be off, unfortunately, for the bandwidth. So I guess for you guys, please just share your reactions with me, those emoticons that we have. Alternatively, you can ask me questions in the chat. If I don't see them, I'll ask Dr. Liebenberg if she could just alert me to any questions that you may have. So as I mentioned, I'm so excited to be here again. I know that I probably, or some of you have seen me last year doing emotional intelligence. I'm doing it again today, and it is one of my favorite topics. I love talking about emotional intelligence, and I hope that some of you are able to grab some of these you're able to apply some of the things that you learned today. I certainly hope that I can add to your toolkit. So as Dr. Liebenberg mentioned, if you were in the session before, it's not a problem because it's all about what you were sort of going through in that moment or the perceptions you had at that time for certain things to pop out or stick out for you. Me, myself, as someone who facilitates the session quite regularly, I'm still learning from it as well. So I still think you will be able to get some benefit from the session today. And for those that, if it's your first time you're joining the session, welcome. I'm sure there's something that you can get away or take away from today's lesson. Okay, so first things first, I like to start with a Mentimeter just to test our knowledge to see if we're all on the same page. Mentimeter is I'm just moving it to the right screen. Sorry about that. I don't think I'm sharing the right screen. Just one moment. Sorry. It seems I'm not presenting it. Okie dokes. It should work now. Can you see my screen? Is it showing the Mentimeter screen?
Yes, it does. I will put the code in the chat box as well.
Excellent. So what you need to do is on top, you'll see the instruction. It says go to menti.com. And once you insert that, that address in the URL, it will then request you to insert a code. So that is the code that you will see on the screen. And once you've captured that information, it will ask you the question, which you will then have the opportunity to answer. Essentially, what does emotional intelligence mean to you? So all you need to do is capture what it means to you, and it can be anything. In your own words, what does that mean for you? And then click on submit. Not to worry, we won't know who wrote what response, or we will see the feedback on the screen. So just for me to repeat the instructions again, just access www.menti.com, enter the code 56618106 and capture your response. We have some responses which I'll read out to you. Understanding your emotions and having an understanding of other people's emotions, in touch, maturity, insight, understanding where others are coming from, empathy, knowing what triggers you and how to better respond, tact, kindness, understanding me. It's quite a lot of responses. Purposeful control of emotions and reactions, being in control of self, that is your perception of self and personal emotions, understanding your emotion, ability to understand others' emotions. These are right on point. So it seems like we do have a great understanding. There's certain things in here that really stands out for me. In particular, knowing what triggers you, that's very important. And then also empathy, I saw somewhere it came out. And insight, the word insight. So I hope to touch on all of these today, and hopefully it will give you an understanding of how, of emotional intelligence, number one, and how we can control our emotions and understand others better. All right, so let me stop sharing and I'm going to move over to the presentation slide. So there's a definition by Daniel Goldman, who is a world-renowned psychologist. And his definition is, I hope you can see my screen now, understanding one's own feelings, empathy for the feelings of others, and the regulation of emotions in a way that enhances your life. Now, I'm sure if we looked at the answers that was posted on the Mentimeter, there's quite an alignment between that, and it's quite accurate. But if we understand what it should be, let's go back to see what actually happens. Okay, so let's for a moment think that we are operating on either a rational or your emotional mind. Now, your emotional mind is quick and it's hot and it's feelings focused, whereas your reasonable mind is cool and it's calm and it's task/logic focused, right? So that's where you're sort of taking in your past experience, your research, your logic, your analysis into account before you're making a decision, Whereas with emotional intelligence, you are operating on that emotion. You are responding on what you are feeling, and that could be quite dangerous. So I think I'm going to give you some scenarios and then Give me a thumbs up if you have ever done this or if you've experienced it. So number one, for example, if you are responding in the heat of an argument and with anger, and later, once your emotions settle, you sort of see it clearer and you have regret for the things that you've said and the actions you took in that moment. Give me a thumbs up if you've experienced that before. I can see some thumbs. I see my screen is quite small. Another scenario would be, for example, if you had to do a specific task, a task that usually gives you some sort of anxiety or fear, tasks that usually are associated with that is public speaking, for example, or doing a presentation. So because of that fear or the anxiety you have with public speaking or doing a presentation, you'd rather shy away from doing that task, or you would think of an excuse why you cannot make it, you can't do it. That, for example, is also where you are being controlled by your emotional mind. So if you experience something like that, give me another thumbs up. And then the final scenario that I have for you is if you are busy with a project and your supervisor or your manager sort of questions something about your work, and immediately you respond to defend it without actually hearing what it is that they had to say. So in that moment, you are immediately defending your work. And it's only later where, again, when you allow your emotions to settle, you then have a different perspective and you're able to see that there is potentially some merit to their questions. Now, those, ladies and gentlemen, are scenarios where you are operating on with your emotional mind. So what we want to do here is we want to be able to understand our emotions, but then also take into our reasonable mind and our past experiences and logic. So it's sort of an integration of the two. It's where you are able to say, I know what I feel and why I'm feeling it, but I'm choosing to respond in this particular way. And that's when we are using a wise mind. It's when you are integrating both the emotional mind and the reasonable mind, when you're taking it both into account, but then deciding which course you're going to take. The minute you are responding immediately and it's based on emotion, obviously that is where you are using your emotional mind, because your emotional mind sort of clouds your judgment in the heat of the moment. And that's when you need to take a moment to reflect. And sort of give some thought into your action and your response. I want to mention this, and I'm going to say this a few more times, most likely during the session. But what you think navigates/dictates how you feel, and how you feel navigates/dictates how you react or your action. I'm going to say it again. What you think dictates what you feel, and what you feel dictates how you respond, how you react. So what we need to do is to work on our thought process and the things that we are telling ourselves. I'm going to come back to that. Okay, so moving on with the presentation, the features of emotional intelligence are, the first one is self-awareness. So that's all about understanding what we feel and why we're feeling it. And that's quite important because that's the starting point. Again, what we're thinking. Then we have self-regulation and motivation, and I like to do those together because it's all about handling your distressing emotions in an effective way so that it does not get in the way of something that you want to achieve. So it's regulating yourself so that it doesn't hinder that situation or whatever it is that you want to do. Empathy is having or sort of knowing or having an understanding of how someone else feels. And then finally, social skills. It's all about putting all of this together into a skilled relationship. All right. So this was sort of the backdrop of emotional intelligence, the understanding about it, the context. Now I want to move over into the tool that you need to use in order to sort of strengthen your emotional intelligence. And I want to introduce you to the ABCDE model, which was developed by Albert Ellis in his field of rational emotive behavior. So ladies and gentlemen, this is an important part of the session because what happens now, whatever I'm going to explain to you is quite critical, because at the end of the session, I'm going to ask Dr. Liebenberg to just place a link in the chat, which you will need to click on, and it will take you to an assessment that you need to complete, which will be on the emotional ABCDEs. And it's quite nifty, the tool. So what will happen is once everybody submits, as you've seen with the Mentimeter, it will display the results on the screen. Okay, so before I move on, before I explain the ABCDE model, I just want to ensure that everybody understands what they need to do. Just make sure you take in the information, because there is going to be a little assessment at the end of it. Please give me a thumbs up if you are comfortable. If you have any questions, please place it in the chat box. Okay, I have some thumbs up by Niraj. Is everybody else okay? Okay, I'm seeing another thumbs up by Vilashini. I'm going to assume that everybody else is comfortable. Okay. So the good news is, ladies and gentlemen, there is no assessment. So you can breathe, relax, put your pens down. I'm sure that some of you picked it up immediately, took some pictures of the screen, because you had to make sure that you were getting the information. Not to worry, there's no assessment. I just wanted you to feel what it feels like to be activated, to have an activating event. So if we look on the emotional ABCDEs, we have A, that's your activating event. And I think, well, I can't see your faces, but you will know for yourself internally if you were activated. And that's because of your beliefs of that event, which leads to C, the emotional consequences, and D is where you will need to dispute that, and finally E, where you effect new beliefs. So I'm going to explain what happened over here. Oops. Oh gosh. Okay. So the activating event in this situation could have been the upcoming test. So usually when I have the session, I can see the screen, or I can see everybody that's in the session, and there would be slight movements. I would witness, and maybe some of you have done this, I'm unsure, but I'd witness people picking up their pens, moving closer to the notepad, beginning to write down exactly what I'm saying. Some people pick up their cell phones to take photos. I would see raised eyebrows, maybe somebody rubbing their head. I'd also witness people looking upward, like they're thinking about something. So this, for example, is an activating event. Now, what I want you to understand, that you could have had an emotional consequence right now because of this upcoming test. And that consequence could have been fear, panic, excitement. Now, it's because of your beliefs of that event that dictates your feeling. Because remember, I said it's what you think, which dictates how you feel, which dictates how you act. So if, for example, your beliefs on the event, if you were telling yourself, I'm going to make a mistake, I'm going to look silly, I'm going to be embarrassed because all my colleagues are going to see my scores, and what if it's low? That is self-talk, ladies and gentlemen. That is self-talk. That is the story you're telling yourself, which is resulting in an emotion. That's your thought process that's triggering an emotion. Okay. Some of you may actually have been excited to write this assessment. But again, it also has to do with what you are telling yourself. Maybe you told yourself, oh, yes, finally, people can see that I'm smart because my results will be on the screen or whatever the case may be. It still has to do with what you are telling yourself, the story you're telling yourself. So, whatever that self talk is, and let me tell you, it's a split second. It happens so quickly, it washes through your mind, and immediately it triggers a reaction. And that is your activating event. So what you need to do is you need to debate it. Whatever it is that, whatever your trigger was in that moment, you need to debate it. Um, and how you do that is by asking yourself a question or questions around your thoughts. What led you to that? Why are you thinking that? Why is it that, for example, if you had fear or panic, why, if the self-talk you gave yourself was probably around, I was going to make a mistake, I was going to look silly, I'm going to be embarrassed, my score's going to be low, that's when you need to debate it. Is it, what if I take notes? What if I pay attention? I am quite smart. I'm sure I can pass this assessment. So you have to ask yourself questions to be able to uncover and unpack why you have that thought, what it is that's making you think that way. And we need to change that. We need to change your thinking into something that's going to propel you forward. Because at the moment, the self-talk that you're telling yourself is restricting. It's creating fear, it's creating panic, or anxiety, for example. You need to debate with yourself, talk to yourself. Always say you need to communicate with yourself, to unpack that irrational belief or that irrational self-talk that we constantly feed ourselves. And that's what we need to do, update those beliefs. So for those of you who haven't heard the story, I'm going to tell it. So I've been teaching emotional intelligence for some time, and I know about the emotional ABCDEs. I've been using it. I understand how we would have irrational beliefs and tell ourselves something that just makes no sense, and we'd believe it and we'd react in that way. So I know all about the model, and I was given a task to do a presentation. I was asked to present a workshop where I had to be trained to present the workshop. So it wasn't my content, wasn't my material. And something about this task gave me so much anxiety. I had fear. I was really panicky. I was worried. Um, and because I understand the ABCDEs, I was trying to navigate in that situation. What was the underlying issue here? What was causing that anxiety? So I had to do this presentation in front of a panel of judges, and they had to sort of sign me off to say, yes, Luan, you're good to go. You can do the session. And something about that task of me being in front of this panel of judges gave me so much fear. And it's not normal because I've been doing learning, or I've been hosting sessions for a very long time. I've been in learning and development for over 10 years. So I've overcome that barrier a long time ago. But something about this was different, and I didn't know what it was, and it bothered me. So, I mean, I remember I even tried to get out of it. And I remember that at the end of the day, I was so exhausted with all that emotion, all that anxiety because of this presentation I had to do. And I would rehearse in my yard, up and down, walking with my little page, preparing for this presentation where I needed to be signed off. And it was really hard. And it was only, I think, probably the morning of the day that I had to do the presentation, I realized what I was doing. So even though I was motivating myself, saying things like, you know, when you can do it, you've been doing this for a long time, you've got this, girl, whatever the case may be, I was still nervous and I still had so much anxiety. But what I didn't know, what I was also doing is that I was visualizing something else in my mind. So even though I was giving myself those motivating words of encouragement or whatever the case may be, I was visualizing a completely different picture. So when I was rehearsing in my yard, I would be doing the lesson and saying whatever, and I would visualize the judges saying things like, why would you do it in that way? That's not how we sort of showed you how to do it. Why did you take this angle? So I was visualizing that feedback. And that feedback that I was visualizing was sort of crippling me in a sense. It was giving me that fear and that anxiety. And I didn't even know I was doing it, even though I was motivating myself to push forward, you know, be confident, you can do this. That visualization changed everything that I was telling myself. And I'm telling you the story because it happens so quickly. We think about it so quickly that we miss it. Because even though I was telling myself the right things, I was showing myself the wrong things. So we have to be mindful of what we are telling ourselves. Because again, what we think dictates what we feel, which dictates how we act. So be mindful of what you are telling yourself, the story you're telling yourselves, because that's what's giving you that reaction. All right. Okie dokie. So I want to move on to this section, which has to do obviously with your emotions. So while, for example, we understand, sorry, I can just hear music in the background, one moment. So while we can understand, you know, what is triggering us, or we can understand what what we think is sort of triggering us, we need to know what our common triggers are, because there could be a variety of things that triggers us, and we're all different. We all sort of a product of our past. So it's very important to know what we are more sensitive to. There are certain situations that you are more sensitive to. So in this upcoming task, I'm going to give you 5 minutes where you are able to think about what your triggers are. Um, and some of the triggers that I've received in the past, just to give you an idea so that you can understand, is, for example, when you are in a situation where somebody speaks to you as if you are inferior. That, for example, could be a trigger of yours. A trigger of mine, for example, is anyone, if I feel that my brand is being tainted, that's a major trigger of mine, because I feel I work really hard. And if somebody's saying something that goes against what I feel my brand is, or the brand that I'm displaying, that's a major trigger of mine. And it's important to know this, because when the circumstance arises, you are able to identify that this is actually a trigger of mine. So I may react emotionally. I may want to just step aside or walk away or think about it before I respond. That is why it's important. So the first thing, I'm going to give you some time to think about what your triggers are. But how you do that is, I want you to think about, in the past couple of years, for example, the moments where you were emotionally triggered. I need you to write that down. You don't have to write out a full sentence because we have sort of 5 minutes, but you will know exactly what that situation is. So you can say, for example, that night at Johnny's place. That would be scenario 1 for you. You could say scenario 2 for you could be, um, in the meeting with my colleagues, for example. That could be scenario 2. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes. I want you to think about, in the past couple of years, what scenarios, the scenarios you had in the past where you were emotionally triggered, and I want you to document that. The other thing I want you to document is what happened in terms of your bodily reaction once you're triggered, because that's also very important. For example, some people will say their palms get sweaty. Some people say their heart starts racing. Some people say that they get a heat wave that sort of washes over them the minute they are triggered. Their facial expressions change, or they fold their arms. Another one I heard is that they raise their eyebrows once they triggered. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Let me just make sure that I put the music on, and then I want you to think about those things. I'll put the instructions in the chat box as well. Let me just quickly include the sound. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes to think about that. Just quickly a sum up, think about when you've been triggered before, what those scenarios were, and I want you to document what your bodily changes were. Okay, I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Let me just move to document that for yourself. Sorry. Why is it not playing now?
We can hear it.
Okay.
Just the clock is not moving. So I'll keep an eye on the time then. I'll tell you when it's 5 minutes.
I'll tell you when it's 5 minutes. So I don't know why it's not displaying or moving, but it's on 4:40 at the moment. There's 2 minutes remaining. It's just about 20 seconds remaining. All right. So let me get my screen. I'm just going to reshare my screen. Okay. So here we are. That should be sharing properly now. Okie dokie. All right. So what have we learned? So I hope that you were able to sort of remember some of the scenarios where you were emotionally triggered. And if you have a look at those scenarios, you may be able to identify a common theme between those scenarios. You may be able to see that it actually has to do with somebody using a certain tone when they speak to me, for example, or it is a setting where someone where you feel restricted, for example, where you feel under pressure. You may find that when you look and you analyze those scenarios, that it's actually underpinned by a certain scenario that in particular triggers you, and that's what's important. The other important thing, which I mentioned earlier, is how you respond to that in terms of the bodily changes, whether it is your palms get sweaty, you get a heat wave, or your heart starts racing, for example. Do I have a question? It was probably an error. All right. So I want to give you an example of mine. Where I was in a meeting, and as you know, I've mentioned before that one of my major triggers are if my brand, my personal brand, what I believe my personal brand to be is sort of tainted, that I know for sure is a trigger for me. And I was in a meeting, a large meeting, and one of the managers said something along the lines of, you know, this was supposed to be sent to me like three weeks ago by Lewin, but I haven't received it yet. So when I get this document, then I'll provide my feedback. That's sort of something that, the thing that he mentioned in the meeting. And immediately my heart starts racing like super fast. And and I knew that I've been triggered, and I knew in the moment because my heart was racing, I knew I was triggered. But I also knew that what he was doing was a major trigger of mine. I knew that I was most likely going to react irrationally. So I knew that I had to just take a moment and debate that with myself. And that's another important part of emotional intelligence, is obviously debating, but then perspective taking, which I'm going to get to. And part of my debate, the debate that I had to have with myself in that moment, and it happened so quickly, is I had to ask myself, does he know that I sent this a long time ago? Perhaps he doesn't know. Maybe he missed it in his emails, because surely if he had seen it, he wouldn't have made that comment. And debating that with myself allowed me to at least slow down my heart rate, number one. And number two, it gave me a moment to sort of respond calmly. So I asked the question, were you aware that I sent this some time ago? I just quickly looked for the date and gave the date to him. And then he apologized and he said, no, he actually didn't know that. He's so sorry. His error, his mistake. So that, for example, is where you are able to implement the ABCDEs. The alternative in that moment is where I'm responding using my emotional mind. Because in that moment, my brand is sort of being tainted, which is I know is a trigger. So now I'm telling myself something. I'm telling myself something along the lines of, how dare he? He's doing this on purpose. Um, calling me out, embarrassing me in front of all these people. Now everybody thinks that I am not working, that I'm lazy and I don't do what I say I'm going to do. I could have ran through, and I probably did all those things, and that would push me into reacting emotionally in a way that's not very well thought out, because it's the emotional mind where it's a quick reaction time. But because I knew about this, I was able to apply the ABCDEs, and I was able to calm myself. So that is why I also say it's important that you know what your triggers are. So and you know what your triggers are, and you know what the changes are for you that happens. So if, for example, you know it's the racing heartbeat, that for me is usually my notification to self, Lewin, you triggered, do something. So if you know what your bodily changes are, you know that when it happens, you know that's your indicator, I have been triggered. I now need to apply the ABCDEs, be mindful of what I'm telling myself, debate what's happening, and then choose how I'm going to respond in this situation. And sometimes you don't have to respond immediately. Sometimes you can create a one-liner for yourself, and you could say, I have to give this some thought. Is it okay if I get back to you by the end of the day, for example? You can create a one-liner that you can use in situations where you know you're not going to react appropriately. And you use that, say your line because you know your emotions are rattled up, and then allow it to settle. Allow your emotions to calm down. Think about your next course, your best course of action in that moment, and then you can respond. Another example where we do this is with emails. When somebody sends an email that makes us so angry, and in that moment we're typing so fast because we're so angry about what this person had said. Can you believe they said that to me? So now you're responding, you're responding with this anger, but you know you need to first think about it. Walk away from your desk first, let the emotion settle, and then respond once you have a clear mind. Don't respond with your emotional mind. All right. So the reason why I went through these triggers is because I want you to have an understanding. Keep record of what your emotional triggers are, awareness of the changes in your body, whatever that may be, and then you need to try and regulate it using that ABCDEs. Okay. Um, so I want to go back quickly to our first scenario, the triggering scenario that I gave you, where I said there's going to be an upcoming assessment. So far to date, I've primarily been speaking about what happens to you, but we also need to look outward, and we need to try and take the perspectives of others. Okay. So what happened to you was you had an activating event. You could have most likely had an activating event with the upcoming test that I fibbed about. Then you did some, can you guys see my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes, you can.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. So you did a little bit of self-talk, irrational self-talk most of the time, which led to an emotional consequence, which could have been fear, panic, anxiety, sometimes excitement, which is really good, what we hope for. But it could have led to an action. And let's say your action was, for those of you, some of you could have felt like, I don't have time for this. I don't have time for assessments. My workload is sky high, and you want to give me an assessment this time of the day. Oh no. You could have left. You could have left the session. And if you had done that as a facilitator, me observing and running the session, if I in that moment witnessed 5 to 10 people leave the session, that action over there could have been my activating event. And that activating event of you guys leaving could have led to my self-talk. I could have told myself a story, long story, very quickly in 2 seconds, because it happened so quickly. I could have said, you see, you're not good at this. You are not meant to be in this field at all. You don't know how to do presentation. You don't know how to run a workshop. I don't know, whatever. I could have gone down a whole rabbit hole of how I'm not good in this particular event or action or presentation or workshop, whatever. And that obviously could lead to an emotional consequence. I would have been totally down. I would have been depressed. I would have feeling so sad about myself. But I know this is like really extreme scenarios, but it could happen. And I want you to see that when we are triggered and we are navigating which action we take, that action could lead to somebody else's activating event, if that makes sense. So we need to, for example, be mindful. Being emotionally intelligent, we need to be mindful and observe the actions of others to pick up on those cues, to pick up on where we can see that maybe somebody has been emotionally triggered. And we then need to choose the way forward. We need to choose how we're going to navigate that going forward. We need to maybe adjust how we're saying it. Luckily for me, I know that the test was a setup, and I would understand that if people left, I wouldn't take it personally. I would be able to see that it actually has nothing to do with me. Maybe it has to do with the self-talk that's happening in my learner's mind. And I can't see that. I'm not privy to the conversation that you guys are having in your mind. So I don't know. Because if you think about it, in that moment when I told you there's an upcoming test, whenever you are sort of activated, when you're emotionally triggered, it's very seldom that we can see that you've been emotionally triggered, that somebody has said or did has triggered you. There is subtle indications that you've been triggered, but we're not in your mind. We don't know. But you need to be able to read the situation and see that observe that there's some sort of change in the interaction, and you may have contributed to that. And you need to know that it's most likely perspective and self-talk that's happening, the thinking of the person that you're interacting with, which is causing their reaction, their emotional reaction, and which is causing them to lash out. I want to give you a really relevant example. No, I probably have 6 minutes remaining. But if we think about, and I know you're probably all so tired of hearing it from it. I am. I'm tired of seeing the videos just like the whole day, every day. But the thing about Chris Rock and Will Smith, I'm going to speak about it for 2 minutes because I know you're probably tired about this as well. So I'm sure you've seen it on somewhere or people have spoken to you about it. But essentially, Chris Rock made a joke about Jada Smith, and Will Smith walked up on the stage and smacked Chris Rock. So if you have to review the tapes, you could see that in the moment where Chris Rock made the joke, initially Will Smith found it funny. And Jada did not. You could see she was unimpressed. And I'm assuming at this point that Will Smith probably looked at Jada, saw her reaction, and that was his trigger. And he walked up onto the stage and he slapped Chris Rock. Now on the outside, viewing that, your immediate thought could be, oh, who does he think he is? He thinks he has the right to just walk up on that stage and smack somebody like that. That's wrong. How dare he, for example? Now, if you look at how Chris Rock responded, it's actually quite amazing. Because while he said the joke, we can say it's inappropriate, and he witnessed Will Smith walk up on stage and smack him. He initially made a joke and he said, I don't know what he said, but it was a soft joke. And then Will Smith reacted and swore and whatever the case may be. You could see in that moment that Chris Rock did a calculation in his mind. You could even hear him saying, I could, and then he stopped. Almost as if he was going to say, I can continue, I can make further jokes or whatever. But he did a calculation in his mind to determine if he should continue with this, and he chose not to. It's almost as if he read into what could be going on with Will Smith at that moment. If you start, for example, with the fact that people are good, but something else is going on that's leading them to do something negative, then it's sort of a good place to start. Because if you have the understanding that Will Smith is a good guy, but something else is going on, and it could be a number of things, and it probably doesn't, if I'm Chris Rock now, it probably doesn't have anything to do with me, but this is the action that I'm seeing. And while we don't warrant that behavior, we need to sort of be able to apply empathy to help us to navigate that situation. And that's exactly what Chris Rock did. So on the face of it, the actions look a certain way, but there's something deeper going on. And that's where emotional intelligence comes in to help you to navigate that situation. So Chris Rock could have done a quick thought process where he said, this probably doesn't have to do anything to do with me. He's probably protecting his wife. It's probably because he's also under a lot of stress with the awards going on. He's up for a nomination or whatever the case may be. He could have done that quick analysis and determined that if I'm going to push this, it's not going to go down well. So let me stop this. Let me take this offline, as you will, and then we can resolve it separately. That doesn't mean that we agree with the actions that the other person is taken, and in this example, it's Will Smith. But it allows us to apply empathy, and it allows us to navigate the situation better. I hope that sheds some light in helping you determine not only when you are activated, but how your actions can also activate someone else, and how we need to be mindful. And when we do that, we need to sort of pay attention to the nonverbal cues. This is when you're being mindful. So it's be observant, pay attention to maybe if they're raising their eyebrows, if that's maybe something you've seen when they're angry, if they squint their eyes, for example, or maybe if they fold their arms. But there's sort of some action that you may pick up on, and that's where you need to read into it, and that's where you need to adjust what you're doing to sort of to have a better outcome. That's what I want to say. So recognize and interpret the nonverbal cues and adjust and amend your actions based on the feedback you're receiving. I just want to play this final clip for you. If you can't hear this, then please let me know.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
I always enjoy watching Brene Brown. So yeah, I still need to be mindful of using the word at least. But what I want you to take away from that is empathy fuels connection, which is quite important. So, you know, within emotional intelligence, it's really important about understanding what you feel and why you're feeling it, but it's also to be able to understand, have some sort of understanding of how someone else feels. And especially when you're interacting with someone, it's being able to read that and being mindful that not only do we have this irrational self-talk that we're constantly spewing at ourselves, but most likely the person that we're interacting with does the same. And that could be what is fueling their emotional reaction, if there is one. And in those circumstances, I always encourage you to have courageous conversations, because it's all about getting the thoughts out and communicated with someone in a constructive way. Because when we are not speaking about the actual issue, we are thinking about, we're telling ourselves most likely an incorrect story, essentially. All right, so we have reached the end of our session. Yeah, I do hope and I encourage you to reflect on these tools, and hopefully you're able to change your irrational beliefs into healthier ones. And if we can master our thoughts or our perspectives, we can master our emotions, which means we can master our actions. All right, so thank you everybody for allowing me to speak to you for this last hour. Dr. Liebenberg, I don't know if there are any questions before I hand over to Dr. Liebenberg.
Oh, we had one person in the chat share some the responses to the assignment that you gave. I'm not sure if Nonto Tuzelo would like to comment further on that. Can you see the chat, Lewin? They were speaking about.
Let me just stop sharing. All right.
Oh. Besides that, there are quite a few thank yous and mentions of how much the session has touched them. Goodness, even me, I can picture those moments where, you know, you're receiving negative feedback from somebody and you struggling to keep the anger or the anxiety, the frustration in check, you know, and trying your hardest not to cry. I mean, I've done that a couple of times. Had I seen the session before, things might have turned out a little bit differently, you know, but now there's an opportunity going forward to promote the self-awareness and recognize these triggers and try and change the response. And I'm sure that would impact how you perform, how you produce. So this is really been very, very helpful to me, and I'm sure, well, according to everyone else in the chat, it's been very helpful to them as well. Banesh is asking, is it emotionally intelligent to put out an angry response after processing your trigger on purpose?
I don't know about that, because it sort of feels like you're still triggered. I think there's more unpacking that you would need to do in that situation, because you would want to have a constructive, calm conversation. And at that moment when you're angry, you're only sort of seeing your perspective, but maybe there's a further conversation to understand the perspective of the other person that you are interacting with. And maybe that will give you a deeper level of understanding, which would reduce that anger emotion, if that makes sense.
And I'd also like to add that, you know, this takes practice. I mentioned
Absolutely.
in the chat, I knew that this test was not going to happen, but I could feel the panic because, you know, oh my goodness, I'm not going to have bad responses. People are going to think I'm stupid, you know, and that's a normal reaction, especially in academia, and it's something that we really need to get out of our heads. And that really does come with practice. Speaking of which, This session will be hosted on the UKZN YouTube channel. So if any participant here would like to rehash this session, just, reinforce these concepts, you can direct yourself to the UKZN website and find it there. Unfortunately, our time is up. Lewin, would you like to say any last few words before we end?
Last few words. Well, thanks for having me. I do want to say one thing. I've mentioned earlier that you need to have courageous conversations. Sometimes, well, probably most of the time, you actually need to have conversations with yourself, where you need to coach yourself through it. Is emotional intelligence inherited, or is it always learned? I think it's the nature versus nurture situation. I don't know, because I can see that my daughter is emotionally intelligent from the get-go. So I don't know. But it's definitely something that we need to work on and we need to strengthen.
Well, thank you so much for being here today, Lewin. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for enlightening us, and we look forward to your next presentation in May sometime. I think you'll be speaking to us more about accountability.
Okay.
Very much looking forward to that one. For everyone else, thank you for joining us today, and you can also head over to the UKZN YouTube site to view the session again if you'd like. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow for the Doctoral Academy on Wednesday. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much.
You're welcome. Goodbye.